Hi, I'm Reggie Turner, and I'm here with Terrence Moore and Jen Miller. The Flipside starts right now. Welcome to the show. Today we're joined by Julie Herman, the Director of Marketing of Brook Lane, and also by Chris Boren, the Director of Development. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome. First, Julie, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you came to Brook Lane, and then transition and talk to us about the history of the organization.
Okay, so I came to Brook Lane 4 years ago, and I've spent my career in marketing and PR and always in the nonprofit sector because I feel like working for an organization that has such a powerful mission and helps people in the community makes your work much more meaningful. So as far as the history of Brook Lane, I think a lot of people in this community probably don't know the history of Brook Lane, but it is a very, very unique and wonderful history. So during World War II, instead of being drafted into military service, conscientious objectors could do their volunteer service in mental hospitals. But throughout the 1940s, the conditions in mental hospitals were deplorable. There was one instance of a mental hospital in Philadelphia that had a capacity for 2,500 patients, and they had 6,000. So as you can imagine, they were understaffed, the patients were not taken care of, and this was the case across the country. There were stories in Life magazine that exposed these deplorable conditions, and they described the hospitals as not even being able to see the floors because they were covered with patients. So at that time, the Mennonite faith community rallied together and said, this is not okay and we need to do something about this. And so they really took it to heart, and they transformed mental health care as we know it. And so they formed a committee, and they chose 3 locations throughout the country where they wanted to open mental hospitals that would run based on a very compassionate care kind of model. And the eastern location was a 115-acre farm on Leitersburg-Smithsburg Road, which is where the main campus of Brook Lane still is today. So that's kind of how we came about. At that time, in 1949, they opened a 23-bed hospital, and really the rest is history. We have grown over those past 73 years. Our hospital now has 57 beds, and many, many more programs and services than just an inpatient hospital.
And the hospital at this point is not just at the main campus. There are satellite offices, is that true?
So there is only one hospital, and that's at main campus, but we do have 3 satellite outpatient locations.
So realistically, you're not limited to serving 57 people.
Correct, correct. That's just 57 inpatient beds.
So historically, when did those satellite offices come into play?
So I believe it was 1993 when the first one was opened, and that is what you may know as our North Village location off of Moggins Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue.
Right there in the shopping center, right? Yeah. And I guess the other question I had, you mentioned that the Mennonite community, or the Mennonite group that started the effort, the compassionate care model. Talk to me about that. What does that mean?
So they wanted to ensure that mental health patients were treated with the utmost respect and compassion. Back in the 40s, most patients were restrained. Many were in straitjackets, and they just felt like there was a much better way to do that, and that they should really just be treated humanely, and that wasn't happening at the time.
Interesting.
And when you say that, the stigma of the perception of institutions, exactly what you described is the first thing that comes to mind that you've seen in movies and perpetuated through the media as well. So it was a completely different model. And how does the interaction happen that around compassion inside the facility?
So what a lot of people don't realize is that if you are inpatient, you don't just spend all day locked in a room. We don't do that at Brook Lane. So there's a lot of group therapy, especially for the adolescents. That seems to be the way to get them to talk and to feel comfortable. And then there's also the one-on-one therapy as well.
So historically, though, if we look back from a historical perspective, can you talk to specific things that these 3 hospitals that were built and operated by the Mennonite community differed from what we might find elsewhere, other than obviously the straitjackets? But how did they? I mean, is it true that even back then there may have been, I hate to say this, but there may have been some people that needed to be in rubber rooms, so to speak?
Well, and I mean, even today there are quiet rooms, and sometimes if someone is having, you know, an incident, they may need to spend some quiet time, but it's nothing like it used to be we don't have straight jackets at Brook Lane. And I would say that I can't speak to the other organizations that were formed back then, but I know for Brook Lane, because people were coming there and doing their volunteer service, we had barracks and then later dormitories, and people would live there for 2 years to do their volunteer service, and it was still a working farm. So that's one of the things that made it so much different than some of the other mental institutions that, you know, had been around at that time. So the staff and the volunteers would work together. They would plant the crops, harvest them together. They would sit down and eat with them, and work together and spend time together all throughout the day.
Historically speaking, how did, or do you, is there evidence that the model that Brook Lane and these other institutions adopted impacted or influenced other hospitals, other mental hospitals throughout the nation?
I'm sure it probably did. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
You also touched upon staff and volunteering as well, because I think that was part of the stigma as well. I know the history of abuse in facilities years ago, mistreating of people who were staying at the facility. What kind of training does the volunteers have today, or is there some kind of certification that goes into the work that happens inside the facility?
So things have changed quite a bit, because when the draft ended in the 70s, then there no longer was a need for the volunteer. The conscientious objectors were no longer doing the volunteer service. And so we actually don't have volunteers taking care of patients and clients today. Mm-hmm. So it's all paid staff doing that. And as far as the training, all of our therapists are master's level therapists, which is not the case for every mental or behavioral health facility, but that's just something that we believe in at Brook Lane. And we also have 19 medical staff members, so either doctors or nurse practitioners. And then as far as we have behavioral health specialists in our special education schools, and we have mental health associates in our hospital, in addition to the you know, RNs and other positions.
Interesting.
Chris, you have been on the job for a full 8 days, and here you are with a media appearance already.
That is correct, sir.
How's it going?
It's going really well. I mean, I really enjoy the organization so far. I really believe in the mission, you know, serving those population that is in need. And I've learned a lot about the institution, and certainly Julie's encapsulation of our history is really neat and really unique. So, you know, looking forward to being a part of the community and learning more about the institution and how it, you know, can serve the community.
Tell us a little bit about your journey of coming here to Brook Lane.
Well, I started out in fundraising at the Fulton County Medical Center in McConnellsburg, and was working there for a number of years, and this position opened up and started here, and I'm looking forward to all the opportunities that'll present themselves as far as working with donors and grant opportunities and the like.
Gotcha.
Can you share a little bit more about how is the organization funded?
I don't know if Julie, that might be a better question. Yeah, go ahead.
So, so obviously, we do receive funding through insurance companies for patients and clients, but we like to provide programs and services above and beyond that. So some things that we do are not funded by insurance companies. So therefore we have to, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we do have to raise funds.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And that comes from corporate partners and a lot of individual donors.
Welcome back to the show. So tell us about all the services that Brook Lane provides.
Do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, as Julie mentioned earlier, we have the 57-bed inpatient facility. We also have a partial hospitalization program where patients are able to receive their care during the day and then return home at night. There's the Thrive program, that is an autism-friendly program that works with children. And then there's all manner of outpatient therapies that take place for patients of all ages. And then there's the InStep program that focuses on substance use. And then there's pastoral care as well that's available for the community and then also for pastoral pastors as well and their families. And then we have the Laurel Hall School that is a licensed non-public school designed to provide education and therapy for students in K through 12. And then there are services that exist throughout the Washington County school system that provides therapy for students in the schools. And then also too, there's programs and continuing education that is provided by Brook Lane as well, for Brook Lane providers and then all providers throughout the region as well.
In regards to your service, how many individuals are you providing services to on a yearly basis? Would you have an estimate of that?
So we actually kind of break out those numbers per program or service. Mm-hmm. So inpatient, I believe we were around a little over 1,600 last year, inpatients throughout the year.
And where do they come from? Are they all in Washington County?
They are not all in Washington County. Franklin County and the counties bordering in West Virginia as well.
Okay.
And Frederick County,
okay.
And sometimes even further away. So for inpatient, all of our inpatients would be referred from an emergency department at a hospital, generally. So that could be any of the hospitals in the surrounding area.
So Meritus would be a referring hospital?
Mm-hmm. One of our biggest sources, referral sources.
And how far east do you get referrals? Just into Frederick County? Or does Frederick County Hospital, for example,
Right, yes. We certainly get some from Frederick. It really depends on where the person is located and if there are not mental health beds available where they are, then we might get them from a little further away. Generally, it's in this kind of tri-state,
What about west of Washington County? Do you get from Cumberland or Deep Creek or
we do get some from that far, and that's a similar situation. We usually only get from that far if the beds out there are full, but that does happen.
Okay.
And do you know what's the kind of the mile radius from the next facility that does exactly what you do?
So there are only 3 private mental health hospitals in the state of Maryland. And we are the second largest.
Wow.
And the largest is Shepherd Pratt, and they're based in the Baltimore area. So that would be.
I've heard that name, actually. Interesting.
Wow. You just read off pretty much a laundry list of different demographics and groups that you assist, and there's only 3 facilities in the entire state.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It is a need. It is a great need. And as you had asked about statistics, for outpatient therapy, we served just shy of 10,000 clients in the last fiscal year.
And tell me what types of issues you address through outpatient therapy.
So really any kind of mental or behavioral health issue. Of course, anxiety and depression are two of the largest, and that has been exacerbated with the pandemic. But it could be eating disorders, addictions, as Chris mentioned with our InStep program, you know, loss, self-harm, all of those kinds of issues.
On the InStep for the addiction counseling, I know that sometimes if you go to court and you know, have a DUI or whatever the case may be, do you get referrals from the court system into those types of programs?
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is something that was not established yet, but we are looking into that so that we can make that seamless transition for those folks that have the court-appointed therapy that they need to take.
Okay, so the courts, and I'm not familiar, do the courts make them take that, or do they go into court and say, hey, I'm taking this, so go easy on me?
Most of the time it's court appointed.
So court ordered, more or less. Okay, interesting. And the partial hospitalization program, talk to us about that. That's one of the things I think you mentioned, where you're part of the day. Where is that, in your main facility, or where are those services offered?
So we actually have 3 partial hospitalization programs. We have 1 adult program, and that's located on the main campus. And then we have 2 child and adolescent programs, 1 on main campus and 1 down in Frederick. And the partial program is really seen as a step down from inpatient. So the person's condition may not warrant them needing to be on 24-hour care. But it's nice because they are able to go home and sleep in their own bed and see their families, and they don't have to feel that, you know, separation. But it's a day-long program, and the typical length of stay is about 7 to 10 days for that program, or it could be up to 2 weeks. And that also, much like inpatient, has a lot of group therapy to it, as well as one-on-one therapy.
So are there specific determining factors that would lead you towards partial hospital program versus full inpatient?
Yes.
I mean, the one I'm thinking of is perhaps suicidal.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you possess a threat to yourself or to others, then you would be a candidate for inpatient. Something that would be a little less acute then would be better for partial.
Okay, interesting.
And, you know, with the issues that we're having right now with opioids and, you know, drug abuse, I know some of that root cause is mental illness as well. So how is that impacting your numbers or your capacity with some of those referrals that you're getting that are pretty much geared to a lot of the addiction?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because our InStep program is relatively new. It just launched in 2019. And that is one of the premises of the program, is that we don't look at addiction as a moral issue. It's a mental health issue. Almost everybody that's struggling with addiction has some sort of underlying mental or behavioral health issue, and that's why they are drinking or taking the drugs or whatever their addiction is. And so it's really complementary to our outpatient services, because we have those therapists there. So they're not just going to go through, you know, a 10-step program where they are conditioned to not drink or not take the substance. The therapist is going to help them get to the root of that problem.
Talk to us about the pastoral care piece of it. I know you mentioned that as one of the services.
So we have 1 full-time chaplain and several part-time chaplains, and our chaplains provide group therapy for all of the inpatients, for the patients at our partial hospitalization program, and then they also run groups at our special education schools. But then they also are available to provide pastoral care to any of the pastors in the local community.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Excellent. You've already teased some of the other things we would like to talk about, more along the lines of mental health challenges in our community, and also attitudes in regards to mental health. So if you guys will stay with us, so we love to talk to you with you more.
Sure.
Awesome. Stay with us. More with Julie and Chris after the break. Welcome back to the show. We're still joined by Julie and Chris from Brook Lane. Thank you guys for staying with us. Jim, I know that there were some things that you wanted to deeper dive in from the last segment.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the services, and we've talked in general, but talk to me about the specific services that are geared towards children and adolescents.
Sure. So we have 4 units in our inpatient hospital, and only 1 is for adults. The other 3 are for children, tweens, and adolescents, and we divide them up by age.
So, so beds?
Yes.
So out of the
Yes.
57, is that right? 57 beds, what percentage, how many adult, how many children?
Well, I'm really bad at math, but I guess that would be 3/4 of the beds.
So literally 3/4 of the beds are not for adults.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah. So there is definitely a need for that in this community.
Has that grown?
It sure has. It sure has. Yes.
Okay. All right.
And then as far as outpatient services for child and adolescent, Chris had mentioned our Thrive program. And that is really a family program. We try to bring the parents into those therapy sessions as well, but it's really to help children. It's autism friendly, but a child doesn't have to have autism to qualify for the program. But it really helps them build coping mechanisms and work on their communication skills, making eye contact, helping them deal with frustration and things like that. So that program is geared specifically for children and adolescents.
Okay.
And then of course we have our 2 child and adolescent partial hospitalization programs.
So from a service perspective, I draw a distinction in my mind of counseling versus therapy. Is that a true distinction? So, my child, let's say, is having difficulty with whatever. I don't know what the subject might be, but it's not at the level where they're, harmful to themselves or others. They're not antisocial. But they're just, general kind of psychological counseling that might be caused by, let's say a divorce or something like that. Do you handle that level of counseling, or are you more the longer term?
Yeah, we handle all levels.
Okay.
And you're absolutely correct that things that we see in our society today that are commonplace, such as divorce, such as parents being incarcerated, parents having substance use issues, a death in the family, that sort of thing.
Poverty.
Poverty, absolutely. That greatly affects the mental capacity of a child. And it doesn't mean that they're suffering from, some major issue, but they definitely could benefit from therapy.
And correct me if I'm wrong, do some myth busting for me. It's my belief that a lot of times mental illness was identified when someone was in their early 20s, like maybe between age 20 to 25, it was identified a lot more. But now with the necessary focus, and we're not there yet, of course, on mental illness, we're recognizing that it's a younger age in the children, in the adolescents, and grade school as well. Is that something new, or is that still maybe a shift in chemical body makeup that happens in the early 20s that really triggers some mental illness?
So there definitely are some mental illnesses that typically don't present themselves until someone is in their 20s. Bipolar is one, and that still stands. But I think why we're seeing such a need for these issues that are arising in children that are much younger, it's really traumatic experiences. So that divorce that they're watching their parents go through, or the pandemic, that caused a lot of issues for the community's youth. And so you'll hear a lot in the mental health community about trauma, and that doesn't have to be something massive. It could be something small that really affected that child.
Yeah.
Is that around like the ACEs score as well? That kind of identifies the level of trauma a child has been through in his or her lifetime as well?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned the pandemic, and I think we underestimate the trauma that we all went through to some degree during the pandemic, dealing with mortality, dealing with death, dealing with fears, dealing with loneliness. A lot of different things triggered trauma in our life, and I think we underestimate it. Have you seen a huge uptick or in a greater awareness? And if not, how do we get a greater awareness out there to for people to really look into mental illness?
Yes, absolutely. So we actually reached out to our therapist to say, hey, tell us, what are you seeing? And overwhelmingly, it was, depression and anxiety connected to the pandemic. And as far as the adolescents, it really was surrounding, or so much of it was surrounding their school experience.
Right.
And the fact that last school year they started virtually for a few weeks, and then they were in person for a few weeks, and then they were back virtually, and some kids stayed virtual the whole year. Some were able to return towards the end of the school year, but the virtual platform didn't work for all children, and some of them just did not excel. And so what our therapists are seeing this year is a lot of children who now are almost a year behind, and so they're struggling. And that's exceptionally hard for the children who typically do well in school, or the perfectionists, and they want to do well, but they're just not at the level where they should be because they've missed so much.
Well, not to mention the parents that are under increased stress and strain as a result of the fact that they may have been displaced from their job, either due to the business closing, or being unable to work from home, but then they've got a very young child that they have to, that might have been in kindergarten, that really was their daycare in addition to the school. Yeah, I've heard a lot of those stories as well.
Absolutely. And then you have to think about the impact on the teenagers, because so many of them missed their prom,
Yep.
or graduation, or other major events that they had been looking forward to for years. And some of those events you have one chance to do that.
Yeah.
So that was a traumatic experience for them.
And and having a son that graduated the year that the pandemic started, who missed, the last half of his senior year, I can tell you it's still talked about today in terms of, what that, he was a straight A, B student, and his last semester he got C's. There you go.
That's what we're underestimating, I think, is
Right.
that impact on the children.
And the paradigm shift, and the reality is that not only was it a significant paradigm shift, but because we had no idea how to deal with it. We were fortunate in Washington County that we were a one-to-one technology to student ratio. That in retrospect, that was a really good idea. So we had it probably better than a lot of counties in Maryland, but it was still very traumatic. I can tell you that for sure. And parents that were on the poverty, in poverty that couldn't afford the internet. Thank goodness we had companies like Antietam Broadband, whose studio we're in tonight, step up and answer the call and provide public internet access and almost low cost or free for families that needed that. So we had everybody jumped in, but that's got to have long-term effects. I want to focus on, when you look at the youth and children, it's not just about the child, it's not just about the children, it's about the whole family. Do your programs address the family piece of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the Thrive program, as I mentioned, is definitely focused on the entire family. But I think when any of our therapists are seeing a child, there are a lot of things that are discovered, and many times, the parents have to learn how to help that child cope as well. So it's not just the therapist teaching the child how to cope, but the parents have to learn how to help the child as well.
And the last question on the children and youth side of it is, talk to us about Laurel Hall.
So Laurel Hall is our special education school. It's K through 12, and we have 2 locations. One is on our main campus, and one is in Frederick. And it's very specialized. We have very high-level children there. We have some that are nonverbal, And so we have specialized programs and rooms for each of those types of conditions and different grade levels and different subjects. And within the school, we have therapists, so they aren't just receiving education, they're also receiving therapy.
Okay, interesting.
We have about 50 students, give or take, in Hagerstown and about 35 in Frederick.
And how do people come to that, how do children come to that school?
So they have to be referred from their home school. Usually there's some sort of an issue with the child not thriving in their home school. And so their guidance counselor and their teachers and administration, it usually starts with setting up an IEP plan at the school, and then they would be referred to Laurel Hall.
And how is that different than, I mean, we have a special ed school, Marshall Street in Washington County. Do you have the Marshall Street kind of student in your program, or are these other issues?
These can be other issues as well. We have, sometimes we have students that have come from our inpatient unit, and that's one of the reasons why they aren't thriving in their home environment or their home school. And so sometimes we can have a more acute type of student.
Okay, perfect.
We have a few more topics that we had on our list to cover with you, so if you guys will hang with us, we'll come back and we'll wrap up the next segment with those.
Okay.
All right. More with Julie and Chris after the break. Welcome back to the show. Thank you guys for staying with us. In my research, in regards to mental health and learning more about your facility, one of the things I saw is that we have a mental health awareness month, which is in May. That's something that I truly had not paid much attention to, but that leads into my question. Can you talk about the changing attitudes that we have, whether it's within our community or nationwide, in regards to mental health?
Sure. So I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier, there has long since been a very negative stigma associated with mental health. If someone needed some sort of mental health care, they were looked down upon. And many people, therefore, didn't talk about that. They wanted to just hide that. And we're definitely seeing a shift in that. I think part of that is the younger generation is much more willing to talk about it. I mean, if you're around 20-somethings, they have no problem sharing, oh yeah, I have to see my therapist tomorrow, or my therapist told me that I should be. And I love seeing that and hearing that, because that's really helping to break down that stigma. And you're right, Mental Health Awareness Month is in May, and Brook Lane has typically done a lot of things to try and get out and about in the community. We set a whole Facebook strategy to be putting messages out there throughout the month. We usually hold 1 or 2 free community programs throughout the month. We host one of our continuing education seminars that month. So we try to get out and do a lot in the community to raise that awareness that we're here and these are the programs and services we provide, and let's open that conversation about mental health.
In addition to generational obstacles, cultural obstacles is also, I can assume, because I know growing up, it was you have an issue, pray it away. That was a response that I heard from my great grandmother, my grandmother, and it was a stigma about expressing mental health. So do you still see that, and is that kind of fading away as well with the new generation?
Absolutely. It is slowly fading away, but you're right. There are different cultural and religious type of influences where people still aren't comfortable letting someone know that they might need help. So we're going to keep continuing to work on breaking down that stigma.
And also, talking about stigma, the stigma of homelessness also has a root cause from mental illness as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that we're dealing with a homelessness issue here locally and of course across the country. But how do we address that root cause of mental illness and identifying that in our homeless population?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways that we could try and do that is to maybe partner with some of our shelters, like the Reach Shelter and other places like that that provide services to the homeless. Because much like we talked about with substance use, most people that are homeless, there is some sort of underlying mental health condition.
Interesting.
So we just need to be able to somehow reach those folks and let them know that we're here and available to help.
Do you find that in looking at these changing attitudes, I know specifically in the addiction piece, and you spoke to it earlier, that people are now starting to see that as more of a health condition rather than just a mental condition or weakness on the part of those that are afflicted by it. And I had a good friend who personally, lost his life because of addiction. Mm-hmm. Do you find that the majority of the folks that you deal with are recognizing that this is not just me being weak and having to have a beer or a cigarette or whatever, and they're seeing it as the health condition that it really is?
That is our goal. Our goal with our InStep program is that they understand that it's not necessarily always their fault. Yes, they are making choices, but there are things that have happened to them in their life, whether it be a traumatic experience or whether it be something they're going through, something they've experienced, something they've inherited, that is causing that. So our InStep program is all about coaching them and teaching them that they shouldn't blame themselves.
Interesting.
And you listed off a number of different traumas that contribute to mental illness, and I think everyone can probably check a box to some degree. And so it's more inclusive than we would assume when we think we deal with mental illness, that it's a personal or private issue, but it's more inclusive because everyone's dealing with something to some degree.
Absolutely.
And how are you getting your word out? How do I contact you? And I just want to also build on when we spoke earlier about what happened during the pandemic, grief. I think a lot of people had lost individuals in their life and didn't have the ability to grieve. And it wasn't the same to stream into someone's funeral than it would be to be around family, to have that touch, to have that embrace. Do you also see a lot of mental illness coming from grief post-pandemic as well? And again, how do we get the word out and contact someone from your facility?
Yes, absolutely. You could not be more correct. Grief is very real, and some people don't recognize that that's what it is, because it could be months or even a year or two later and they're still grieving, and so they don't understand why they don't want to eat, or why they're overeating, or why they don't have any energy, or why they don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning, and that could all be traced back to grief. So we are here, www.brooklane.org. You can call our intake and admissions office at any time, and the lovely people on the other end will kind of walk you through and ask you some questions, and they'll try and find out which program or service might be best.
So that speaks to a question that I had, which is, so you're not just an institution that people need to be referred to. You have direct intake capabilities.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. For outpatient. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Inpatient typically comes from the hospital.
Understood.
And confidentiality. Mm-hmm. What is your policy, or how do you handle confidentiality around your intake process as well?
So all of our employees have to sign a confidentiality document saying that we will not share any information that we obtain at work, outside of work. And then we use an electronic medical records system.
So you're covered by HIPAA, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
perfect.
Excellent. Chris, let's get you back in the game. Tell us a little bit about the current initiatives that you have going on at Brook Lane.
Well, one of the things we're really excited about right now is our Bridge to Hope affair that'll be coming up, and that'll be coming up April 30th, and that'll be at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, starting at 6 p.m. And we're really excited to bring awareness to mental health and raise some funds for that. We'd like to thank all of our current sponsors for that event, as well as just put the word out there that we also have sponsorship opportunities available now. And again, you can go to brooklane.org, and then the information is right there on the front web page to be able to learn some more about the event. I don't know if there are any other current initiatives you want to talk about, Julie?
Do you think we should put a plug in for Washington County Gives?
Yes.
All right.
So want to talk about Washington County Gives as well. That'll be taking place in May. And that's an opportunity, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with that. and we'll be looking forward to putting more information about that. It'll be May 10th this year, and that's a 24-hour giving opportunity for folks to support causes that they're interested in, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity for you to consider Brook Lane as well.
Awesome, Terrence.
Just another organization to add to the list of passions. You do great work, and above all, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you for what you do, what you're doing. I know it's necessary, and we need more of it. So hopefully you're bringing more awareness to doing it and doing it the right way as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that compassionate care model, I think, is, if it didn't impact others, it should have, because that clearly was a need. My question is, the money that you raised, you mentioned early on in this conversation that you like to go above and beyond, and yes, you get obviously, I'm sure patients pay for non-insurance covered things, and insurance covers part of services that you may provide. What are those extra things? The money that you raise, what types of programs are they used for? What do they support?
So one of the programs that we provide is our school-based mental health program, and Chris had touched on it a little. But Brook Lane provides a therapist in every middle and high school in Washington County and 2 elementary schools. A lot of people aren't aware of this program. It is largely grant funded, but not 100% grant funded. And so Brook Lane picks up the balance of that, and that's one of the programs. But every student in those schools can be referred to a Brook Lane therapist. They spend 1 day in the schools. They're embedded in the schools, and so many of the students get to know these therapists and just look at them as if they're, a teacher or an admin person. And the schools typically have given our therapists an office there, and any child can be referred for up to 3 free therapy sessions in the school.
Wow.
And so that's one of the programs that we use the money that we raise to put towards that, because we really believe in it, and we do surveys of the students, and one of the things that we hear is, can you be at our school more often? Because each of the therapists are only at one school, or each school 1 day per week.
Really?
And they really want them to be there more days.
Yeah.
So that's an example of one of the programs that, that we definitely need to continue to raise funds for.
And highly utilized, it sounds like. Excellent. Excellent. What about on the marketing side, or what about on the business side? What is next for Brook Lane? Where do you see your services, your footprint expanding?
So, 2 exciting things. We are hoping to launch transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Say that 3 times fast.
Exactly. In the next couple of months.
What is that?
And
I'm envisioning electroshock therapy, which I've been told before I should get.
Well, so we currently have the electroconvulsive therapy, which is ECT.
Right.
And this, which is referred to as TMS, that's easier to say, is a much less invasive process. So they use magnets, and the magnets stimulate the unresponsive areas in the brain that is causing depression in a lot of people. So they don't have to use anesthesia. The patients can stay awake. They can talk. They can watch TV during this therapy. So we're really excited to be bringing this to Brook Lane in the next couple of months.
Wow, interesting. And that'll be at your main campus, I assume.
Yes.
And is that a therapy that would need to be, you would need to be an inpatient?
No.
Wow. Because I assume the ECT you would.
No, not necessarily. You have to stay for a period of
Right.
time throughout that day until the anesthesia wears off.
Okay.
But it is more of a, you come in just,
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and this treatment typically takes several sessions over the course of several weeks.
And how long has this technology been in use?
That is a good question. I actually am just learning about it myself. So
Okay.
I'll have to do a little research and get back to you, Jim.
Any other cool stuff coming up that you guys are going to be introducing?
Yeah, so I wanted to let everyone know that we have a fairly new CEO. Jeff O'Neill joined us toward the end of the year. And he really is very energetic and really hit the ground running. And one of his big initiatives is building partnerships in the community. So we have gotten involved with Healthy Washington County's Go for Bold initiative. I'm sure many people in the county have been hearing about that, and so we're trying to promote that for them as well. We're promoting it internally with our staff. In the last month, we doubled the amount of staff that we have signed up for it, so we're really excited about that. And we also are a part of Healthy Washington County, and we're working together with those members to complete the Community Health Needs Assessment, which is an assessment that all hospitals are required to complete every 3 years. So we're working very closely with Meredith and the other members of the Healthy Washington County group to complete that Community Health Needs Assessment.
Interesting. You know, you brought up an interesting question. You brought an interesting question to mind. Meredith, for example, there's state control over how many beds they can have and that type of thing. Are you subject to the same state regulations as, and I know they're different because it's a different type of hospital, but do you have state regulations and so forth that you need to comply with?
We do. Okay.
Yes. Okay, interesting.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, as a member of the steering committee of Go for Bold, I appreciate you pointing out that it's not just about weight loss. You know, a healthy lifestyle is also about having healthy emotional and a mental lifestyle as well, and to take care of that. So I'm glad that you're a partner, and I'm glad you're bringing out that awareness. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been excited about it, and our staff have really kind of jumped on board. So we're hoping when the weather gets better, maybe we can start some walking groups and, you know, on campus and do some other things like that.
How many acres do you have again?
115 acres. Yeah.
Interesting.
You'll have to come out and visit us. In the spring when the flowers start blooming, it's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Well, thank you for all you guys do. Thank you for jumping into the fire on day 8. That was very courageous of you. I would love for you guys to come back and talk more. And there's some mental health issues in the Black community, especially among Black men, that I feel that some of the organizations that we work with, we could probably partner to increase the likelihood and the awareness of help being out there. So this was absolutely awesome for us, and we will be cheering you on as you guys move forward.
Thank you so much.
Right. Well, that's all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, we hope you join us again next week for another episode of The Flip Side.